Welcome back to my channel. I'm Aria, this is my husband Andrew, and after a long hiatus of not posting, I have decided to come back to YouTube and just kind of like kick off my new, sort of new, it's got a new name, channel with a Q&A with Andrew. And people on Instagram, which the majority of my following is on Instagram, have generally very similar questions that I get asked very frequently. So I thought it'd be a good thing to just do a Q&A and answer a bunch of these questions. I asked you guys what some of your questions were, and I picked, I think, most of the like repeated ones. We will have a part 2 to this because there were way too many questions to answer in one go. But this is basically questions about us, our relationship, a little bit about like how we got married and met and stuff. So let's start this off with the first question. What was your first impression of each other?
Well, I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me about you was the fact that you were really excited to get to know me and that you liked me. But when you don't know exactly what to say, you're also very matter of fact. That kind of appealed to me because I can deal much better with like direct, straightforward, upfront than I can with a lot of things getting hidden, pushed down, and like formalities, all of that. So that's sort of what I really liked. The thing I was really not expecting was how big your house was. Because I drove in the dark and I couldn't really see it that well, but I could tell it was large.
Yeah.
And it was just so much larger than any other house that I had commonly been in. And it made me just reconsider, like, what am I doing here? Like, so really, like, how am I going to be able to deal with this?
Yeah, I know. I'm so glad that we don't live in a huge house because it would be so hard to clean. It'd be so much work every week or every day, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was definitely very, very matter of fact, very opinionated. Like, I just wanted to make sure that you knew, like, I'm not just like this, you know, sweet pushover person, because I'm not. So I just made it a point to be like, nope, these are my opinions. You may not agree with them. That's fine. But this is me, you know, just have it out. I wanted you to see like who I was, and I'm probably not as matter of fact in daily life as I was then. I don't know. Maybe I am. Yeah, I remember. My first impression of you was that you were a little nervous. You ate so much food though. Well, actually, I don't know. Once we started courting and Andrew came and visited me a couple times, he ate lots of food. At first I don't think you ate as much food. I ate like nothing.
I was kind of nervous that first time too.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of nerve-wracking to meet someone that you've never met before and be like, hey, you want to get married someday? Or maybe, we don't know, let's find out. And also, you definitely had a sense of humor. It was kind of cheesy. You were also a very comfortable person to be around. And I appreciated that because being nervous myself, I appreciated the fact that you were easy to talk to. You were I stopped feeling nervous after a few hours. Like, I was nervous the rest of the weekend that we were together, but like I stopped feeling super nervous after a few hours. And we just had a really good time. Connected really well, and I appreciated that. So I have a whole flock of questions here about how did you know he was the one? How did he know you were the one? You know, how in general, like, how do you know this person is the one? Is there a feeling that they're the one? Or does your heart just click and you know? Like how do you know this is your person?
Well, I think that for me, I had looked at it as if I was to make a decision to get a different job, to move to a different church, to buy a house or buy a car, my first guidance that I would look for on making such a big decision would not be my feelings.
Right.
I would look at, does it actually suit what my base needs are? Does it actually have a lot of the foundational things that are going on? And then, okay, on top of that, you know, the pinnacle of the mountain is then, okay, how do I feel about it? Mm-hmm. And that's very much the way I tried to approach our relationship. A very long story, we'll have to do another thing on it, but I very much knew that God started the process and God was sovereign over this process. And
because you weren't even looking, like, we'll talk about this when
Yeah.
we
later on.
do our video about our how we met and stuff like that. But you weren't even looking for a wife when I just kind of like materialized.
Right. And there
It
was
just like came up. You weren't even like looking for a wife at that point.
and there were several things that are very much just like not things that I had controlled, that I had done, that I could very much see that God had intersected with my path with Arya, and I had prayed about that a lot and knew that I was trusting God to control the outcome, and what I needed to be doing was the next right thing. And so that was my emphasis, and was trying to do the next right thing, trying to live in a way that I had no regret, because I knew that the doors that God had offered to me, I had gone through and checked out as best I could what was there. So things that I was looking for was the fact that you had standards in modesty, entertainment, music, speech. So like you actually saw that the Bible should be governing your basic daily life, and I was looking for somebody like that.
Yeah.
I was not looking for someone who enjoyed the exact same entertainment as I did.
Right.
It's a big distinction to me as far as like, I wanted someone else who was pursuing God, not someone who agreed with all of my pet peeves.
Right.
Another big one was the fact that I was digging in to figure out like, okay, well, you live in this big house, but were you acting like a privileged brat, or were you actually a genuine, godly young woman pursuing marriage? And that's what God had given to her family. But the whole thing about like being privileged is this idea of, well, if we get married and we move to my 1,000 square foot duplex, and I looked it up, I think it was $30,000 to $40,000 per year. I think it was about $35,000 a year at that point. I didn't have a lot of money for a lot of the things that her mother had as a norm.
Yeah.
And things that they did for fun. I was like, I cannot afford this. It would take my like whole annual income just to do one of their vacations.
Maybe not quite, but
That's
something like that.
That's
yeah,
what it seemed
kind
like.
of crazy.
And so I was looking at like, did she see that as something that she was just born into, that she like had just, that was her right? Or was she actually genuinely excited about starting her own life and working our way up through whatever process that God gave us? And then also is a question of, was she trying to have the kind of marriage that the Bible talks about, or were you interested in just getting what you want?
Right.
And that's a big, big difference to me, because, people may not agree on exactly what the Bible says about it, but what we both agree on is that the Bible's the authority on marriage, and we both need to be submitting to what the Bible tells us on how we should live our marriage.
Right.
And that was very, very important to me, to find somebody like that, so that way we had a common authority, and it wasn't like I was fighting to have authority over you and you were not fighting for freedom for me. It's that we both have a common authority of God's word that we're following. That was a big factor as far as like, those are all my just base levels. On top of that, she was pretty. I wanted somebody who was musical. She was very musical. I wanted somebody who was feminine. She was very feminine. She was more feminine than what I was sort of expecting. But those are things where it's like, I had my criteria that I sort of said, okay, these really need to be there. But that's just the base layer. And then the feelings all built on top of that. As far as like, I've enjoyed time with her. And I enjoy talking with you. I enjoyed spending time with you. You wanted to be a farm girl.
Yeah.
I wanted to like have a farm someday, be out in the country. Stuff
we
like
both
that.
had like prior farm experience too.
Right. We both had kind of grown up in the city, and then our families had moved out on a farm when we were about 12 or 13. So we had some common life experience. It was easier to connect that way. And so a lot more of what I was looking at, and I'm sure this question will come up, of, well, but does she need to be perfect? And that's my response to that is, I'm looking much more at the trajectory of her life, not so much at exactly what was going on right now. For instance, she valued clean houses, and I could tell that, but she didn't always pick up everything in a room. Well, that's not a big deal to me, because it's like, you put out so much, that's what you wanted.
Right.
That's what you were aspiring to. That's where you wanted to go. So the fact that you left a few things on the floor wasn't just like, oh, that's a red flag. She's not perfect.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you wanted to have these things, and it's like, that's what I was looking for, is someone who aspired to be that way. You hadn't done much cooking. I knew that you could.
I was still really good at it though.
I knew that you could. And then you figure it out along the way. And that's much more what I was looking for, was the fact that what was she aspiring to do and become, much more than exactly where is she right now there were some things that like were things we had to work through. It's my pet peeve that like tripping over stuff on the floor is just like, it just makes my skin crawl sometimes. But it's like we've worked through that. Like she's getting a lot better and I'm learning how to deal with stuff on the floor. Cats. Like I didn't grow up with cats. I was kind of biased against them for a lot of reasons. My dad is not a cat person. It's like that was something that we worked through. But those weren't the things I was primarily looking for. I was trying to find foundational issues and say, okay, Aria's seeking to be a biblical wife. That's a big thing to me. You're seeking these major pillars foundationally. And then it's like, okay, well, once you've got the foundation taken care of, the fact that we agree on these core issues, well, then we can let our feelings play more once we've actually said, okay, well, should we, foundationally, are we a good fit or are we not a good fit? And then beyond that, it's like, well, that's the part of engagement where it's like, you kind of like each other, but you really have been working on trying to find the common foundation. And once you have a common foundation of you both know what your truth is, what your authorities are, how to work together, on what are your values, then you can enjoy the feeling so much more. Because did I love you the first time I saw you? Well, I was really trying not to think about that. That way I would know if we were both going to be joining together on the same path through life, or if we were on very, very different paths and it was going to be a constant fight. Yeah. Once we got married, because you were going this way and I was going that way. That was much more important to me that we were both going the same direction. And then, guess what? I had a lot of emotions through engagement into marriage. We very, very much were very emotional, very lovey-dovey.
Not emotional like crying, although we did cry sometimes, but mostly because we loved each other so much. We still do.
But the thing is that, like, we click together, because if you look at two puzzle pieces and you see if they're, very similar, then it's a lot easier than when you then go to connect them to have them fit together. Yeah. Whereas if you just grab two puzzle pieces that are the right color and you try to jab them together, well, you're gonna fail. Because they can sit on top of each other, but they're not connected very well. And that's sort of the difference I see between feelings versus foundational things of religion is a big deal. As far as like, do you actually have a common authority that you're both pledging allegiance to? And life experiences play a part. Because what I've heard about with other people's marriages is that marriages struggle enough with communication, even with people who have similar life experiences, that I can only imagine what it would be like if you both grew up in very, very different parts of the world. Some people can do it, and kudos to them. I'm not saying that anybody shouldn't, but it's like, do I want to start my marriage out with any more fundamental problems than I need to? That's what I was trying to build for.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the more that we talked and the more that we found that we have in common and the more that we were able to work through different things that weren't necessarily similar, like convictions or values, most of what we believe is extremely similar. We just disagree a little bit on a few minor points and a couple lifestyle things, but it wasn't anything major. And so the more that I was finding that out, we really are similar. And then we started to get into personality types. And we started to find out how amazing our personalities work together, and then we were talking more, and everything was just kind of a confirmation for me. Do we believe the same things? Yes. Are we comfortable together? Can we converse easily together and work well together? Work out our problems and differences without butting our heads into the wall. I don't think that really works.
Yeah. I rubbed off on you.
But yeah, all of those were just confirmations. There just weren't any red flags, is the thing. There just weren't. Everything just seemed to be pointing towards, this is a really good choice. Once we got to a couple months out from engagement, I was like, okay, I think I love him. And so trying to, still, be matter of fact and work through the stuff that we still had work through. But I was like, yeah, he's the one for me. Not because I don't think that there's just one person that you have to find, and once you find them, life will be perfect, because the Bible never says anything like that, and I really don't think that life itself points to anything like that.
Right. How many people have had perfect lives?
That's a fairy tale. You can marry anyone. But I think my concept of like the one and everything, I think it just depends on like, you know, are you well suited for each other? And can you work together well? Like, do your personalities mesh together well? Well, if that's true, then yeah, like pursue marriage, you know? And once you are married, you know you're in it for life together. It's not like if something goes wrong, you're like, well, I guess he's not the one and I'm gonna, you know, divorce him and go find someone else. He becomes the one the day you get married, I think. And I
Really
think
engaged.
yeah, a lot of people would argue even engagement and like biblical betrothal is like when you're betrothed to this person, you are under a covenant with them. And marriage seals that covenant. You are fused together, you know, after that you are one flesh. And so at that point, like this is the one. That's a much more secure way to like, you know, like this is my husband, he is going to be my husband, he is going to be there for me. You know, we're going to be there for each other for the rest of our lives, and we're in it for life, and that kind of seals it.
And that's one of the things that I've looked at a lot of different times is that if you get married because you like the person and that's your basis for marriage, then if you ever stop liking the person, then you somehow think that you're already divorced.
Right.
Because that was sort of what you were going off of, is I knew this was the right person because I liked them. Whereas if you're going based off of the fact that basically, you know, we're two sinners and we have the option to try to pick the best sinner that's easiest to live with as we can.
Yeah.
God gives us those options while we're single to look around and try to find a best match, make life easier to work together.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all you get. Because after that fact, well, it's like, I believe very strongly that God organizes our life to bring us the people that we need, not necessarily the people that you want.
Right.
Any day I woke up and it was like, this is not shaping up the way that I thought it would, I'd immediately turn around and say, nope, God is working on me through my wife, and not somehow like, oh, I made a bad decision.
Right.
No, it's like, God is the one that made marriage, and that God is the one that brought me my wife. So therefore, God is working on me through this, and I need to be open to the fact that life is a bed of roses, and there's a lot of thorns.
This next question is, what attracted you to each other over the phone and in person? So I think this person didn't know that we didn't really talk on the phone much until we were engaged. We video chatted, so maybe that's it. But we emailed. But that was the primary formation. Communication, there we go, we emailed.
And so the first time we ever met was in person.
Yeah.
And then we had sort of a week process of deciding stuff. And then we did, our courtship was mainly email with about a weekly video chat. And then after we then got engaged, then we traded phone numbers.
Yeah.
And then we called each other a lot while we were engaged. So that's kind of how our communication went primarily.
So what attracted you to me? Other than the things that you've mentioned before, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that a lot of it was, I've already listed as far as like, you kind of acted like a little bit of a know-it-all, which is very much how I would like to act all the time. So I understood it. That was something that's easier for me to understand. I identified with you in that.
Yeah.
And you weren't repelled by the fact that I can come across as a know-it-all. I can be overly analytical, which I don't know that you knew what that meant until you met me.
I really did not. Yeah, that was a phrase that I didn't even know existed until you.
I think the thing that really stuck out to me about you the most was the fact that you had such high aspirations in so many different aspects of your life, and you were going to get. So it was like with your businesses. You didn't just say, well, someday I want to be a photographer. No, you were doing it.
Yeah.
And you had worked through it.
Which is so funny because the first weekend that you came out to meet me, he went to church with my family, and I went off to shoot a wedding. Which is so funny.
Yeah. So I said bye to her from her house.
Yeah. As I left to go shoot a wedding.
Yeah. And so, but that's the thing, it's like with, you know, her talents, you had done violin and you're really good at it. You had done voice and you were really good at it. You were grabbing these things and running with it. And you had this vision for a strong marriage, and you were not about to accept anything less than that.
Yeah. Well, I think that just plays into me being an all or nothing person. It's like, when I decide to do something, I'm gonna do it. And I'm gonna do it pretty well. I'm gonna put a lot, or not at all. But like, that's the thing, is that I'm either gonna do something, I'm gonna do it well, I'm gonna pursue it, or I'm not gonna do it. I do not do well with anything in moderation. Like, I'd be all or nothing. Hello?
Oh, also, you're pretty.
Well, it does help sometimes. I think what attracted me to you, other than the other things that I mentioned before, like, you were very comfortable to be around, and you had a sense of humor. Those were all very helpful. But also I could tell that, and this really got more into like when we were courting, that you really sought to follow the Bible and grow spiritually and closer to God. And that was really important to me because I knew that in marriage, my husband was going to be the leader of the home and the spiritual leader of the home. And I wanted to marry someone that I was going to be completely confident in submitting to him as the leader of our home. And that definitely was something that helped to confirm my choice and also definitely attracted me more to you. The more that I found that he was seeking to pursue God, the more attracted that I was to him. Okay, so this next question is, did you live with your husband before marriage or did you wait to move in together after marriage? I did not live with him. Yeah, both of us believed that we should wait until marriage to cohabitate and remain pure until marriage, so we did not. It was never a thing that crossed our mind to live with each other. And then the next question is, what was your housing situation when you first got married? So Andrew mentioned before he lived in a duplex that was about 1,000 square feet. It had 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It was a really nice little place. It had a little backyard. It was in a small town that was really nice. We could walk. It was pretty safe. It was a lot smaller than I was used to, but it was really nice because I didn't have to clean this huge house, which I was not looking to move into a huge house anyway. It was a great starter home. It was a really nice starter home. And then this next question is, what was the hardest part of deciding to get married? And did you ever have any doubts or fears?
I had one major doubt, and that was really just of my faithfulness. And that's the thing, is like, I was looking at it, I was looking at the average divorce rate, and I had not in that distant of a past, I had known a guy that, very closely, that one day his wife just walked out on him. And it was like, okay, it may have been his wife's fault, it might have been his fault, but either way, it's like, generally, there's 2 sides to every story.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I may not be the person that leaves the marriage, but if I'm unfaithful in the way that I treat my wife, then it's probably make her want to leave the marriage. And so it very, very much just struck me that there's only one way to guarantee that you'll never get divorced, and that's never to get married. And that marriage is such an intimate bond that you've gotten, it's like gluing 2 pieces of paper together.
Mm-hmm.
If you take them back apart, they both lose parts of each other.
Yeah.
They're never the same again. And so that's the thing, is that's what I'd heard about divorce, and the more I've heard about it, the more it confirms what the Bible says about it's right. And so as I just realized that I was a fallible human being and that I'm a sinner. How could I expect to live up to such a high standard as to be faithful in marriage for the rest of our lives when I couldn't be faithful to get other projects done that were just little projects? And there was a lot of different relationships that I had started and they just petered out and I just forgot about them. And so to think about trying...
Not like romantic relationships, like friendships.
Right, yeah, just to be friends with somebody. Because like I was at college and I left college and I was like, oh yeah, I should keep up with that person. And I did for maybe a couple weeks. It's much more that like, I looked at it and I just realized that like, I am weak as a human being and that I don't have the ability to somehow be perfectly faithful for 50 plus years. That's not in my ability list. And so I really, really just had to turn it over to the Lord and trust Him that like when things got hard, that He would help me remain faithful to this commitment that I had made till death do us part, for better, for worse, whether we're sick or whether we're healthy, I would remain faithful. And I don't have that strength, but God has been faithful and God has given me that strength as I've cried out for it again and again and again through that.
For me, I think the hardest part of getting married was I was really excited about it, and my doubts were really, am I ready for this? Am I old enough for this? Am I mature enough for this? Because I was 18. I had just turned 18. I was so ready to get married. But at the same time, as an 18-year-old, you're like, look at what all the other people my age are doing. They are not doing this, And I had these doubts, like, am I really going to be good at this? Like, I'm going to cook every meal. It was kind of a mind-bending thing to wrap around, like, I'm going to be a wife. I'm going to be a grown-up. And that was definitely kind of crazy to me. Which, I don't really think that ever really I don't think we ever really had any problem. Of course, we had some problems because I was not super mature, in ways that maybe would have been more helpful, but at the same time, I think I absolutely have never regretted getting married young. We're a lot better off for it. Just, there's always adjustment things, and, you've only been growing for so long, you're not going to be nearly as disciplined and nearly as selfless as you would be if you grew a couple more years. But the other thing is that marriage really helps you to grow in those areas of discipline and selflessness that you may not necessarily grow that way if you were single. Or it might take longer. So yeah, and then the other question after this was, do you regret your decision? What the asker meant was like, do you regret your decision in getting married or getting married young? I know for me, I never have. There's never been a day when I thought, maybe we shouldn't have gotten married. For me, I have always looked forward and I've never looked back. I'm so happy that we got married, and my life before marriage it was a good life, but I was very lonely, and I really struggled with depression at times. That has gotten so much better because I get to live with my best friend every single day.
Yeah, I can't say that I've ever looked at it as oh yeah, I'm so sad that I got married. A lot more of it's just kind of this is just such a struggle. Why is this so hard? Is this just me? Why am I struggling with this? It's just something that you have to work through, and it's yeah, I don't regret getting married, but it doesn't mean it was easy. And I didn't start it because I thought it was easy. But I couldn't have ever done it in my own strength. I needed God's strength to rely on to be able to lead us faithfully in our role, and I think one of the things I really worked on was trying to prioritize my role to you rather than the emotions I may have been dealing with at any one point in time.
Well, it was definitely a big struggle just being married at that point because it was in the thick of COVID. We got married in 2020. There was just a lot, we were expecting you to lose your job, and there was just so much uncertainty at that time, and yeah, it was crazy. Yeah,
because when I first met you, I had a job, I was working lots of overtime, it was great, perfectly stable. And then in the months that followed meeting you, then when I was... Yeah, so it was after we got engaged.
It was after we got engaged. It was January that they started doing layoffs.
Then the company I worked for started doing layoffs, and we didn't know the company started trying to sell the plant that I was in. They didn't know if it would get shut down. They weren't sure if the company would go bankrupt. There was so much uncertainty. I got essentially a 10 to 15% pay drop because I stopped working any overtime.
And in the middle of COVID, when we were engaged, this was in March, I think, he got 2 weeks of unpaid leave just because they were letting people just stay home during COVID. So that was fun. Well, it actually was fun because he got to come out to my family and stay with us, and we did a lot of painting and house projects.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it was just that there was a lot of uncertainty that first year of oh yeah, we come back from the honeymoon, and it's right, and I don't know how much my paycheck's gonna be.
Or if you'll have your job tomorrow.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's they're literally laying people off right
and left
every few weeks. So it's am I gonna be next? I never know. And you just kind of have to plan for pretty much anything. But yeah, that was a big challenge of it.
If anything's gonna make you regret taking on a wife, that situation is probably gonna be one of them. So this question is, what are you glad you did before marriage, and what do you wish you had done?
What I'm really glad of is that I lived by myself for at least a year. It was about 2 years. I had worked the same job for a while, so I was more stable that way. And I had a set of sellable skills. So I had a degree. I have a degree in biochemistry. I had worked at several different places, so I was fairly competent in different work environments. And was still looking for a job that was really a good fit for me. But the job I was working was when we were getting to know each other was stable. It was not something I was able to prioritize my relationship because I didn't have to put a lot of work into my work outside of work hours. So I was able to really work on my relationship because my job was stable. Simple budgeting, and I've kind of developed I developed a methodology for budgeting without what we think of as everything being budget items. That was a big one for me to work out, how do I run my finances? Being an active member of my church was a big one. And the fight for purity was a big deal as far as I knew that I could conquer sin and that I could hold it off. Probably the biggest single thing that I was very, very glad of having before marriage, in a physical sense was that I was out of debt when we
Yeah.
got married.
Yeah.
All of my college debt, I only had about $10,000, and I paid all of that off and had an emergency fund saved up before we got married.
For me, I'm really glad that I had spent 2 years really pursuing spiritual maturity. When I was about 16, my thirst and passion for spiritual things really started to be ignited, and I just went down this long track of getting to know God and His Word, as deeply as I could, and that was something that I'm so thankful that I focused on so much. Instead of, trying to have fun with my friends. Like, I was at home reading commentaries on Romans. I'm also thankful that I graduated high school early, because if I had not graduated high school at 16, I probably would have still been in school when I met Andrew, and so I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful also for starting my photography business and working that up to a point where I could take it to Missouri and be like, hey, I'm a wedding photographer, I've got some experience, let's move on from there and get some brides in St. Louis. That was really good. The business, though I am thankful that I am retired, was a blessing to us. It really helped us learn how to work together, and
That's for certain.
yes, we
There were
worked
some rough
through
times.
some rough times, yes. But it really did help us learn how to work together. We spent a lot of time together driving. We got to see a lot of the country, traveling all over the East Coast. We went to Maine and Orlando in the scope of a few months, actually, for weddings. So that's one thing I'm very thankful I started before marriage. And just from another very physical aspect, I'm thankful that I worked part-time for my dad and saved up a lot of money so that I could take that money. I bought myself some assets that I knew I was going to need, like a new laptop and a new camera, stuff like that. I made big purchases before we got married, and then I saved a bulk of money, and I put it in a bank account, and that's the money that I used, because I knew that it was going to take me a while once I went to Missouri for business to start coming in. And I knew I was going to need to keep paying for subscriptions and for travel. But I knew that there were things that I was going to need to be paying for to run my business until I started getting clients. And it took a few months to get clients, because we got married in May, and our first wedding was in September. It took a few months. But those are all both spiritual and very physical things that I'm really glad that I did before marriage. I really can't think of anything that I wish I had done before marriage. I'm very thankful for the things that I did beforehand, and I can't really think of anything that I wish I'd done.
Yeah, I just have one major regret of what I did before marriage, and that was that I had a time in my life, a couple years before I even knew that Ari existed, where I really fell into pornography and sort of gave up the fight to avoid it for a while, and that is a major thing. I'm very, very grateful to God for being patient, understanding with me as I sinned in that great way against Aria, my future wife, and helped me get back out of it through amazing situations and just friends that he brought along to hold me accountable, and the different things that he convicted me of, and just he helped me escape from the clutches of that, and I'm very grateful for that. But it's something that if I had not done it, I feel like our marriage intimacy would have been even more special to me, and I would have had less regret on the honeymoon for the things that I'd done before. Even though theoretically it was with no actual physical women, it didn't matter. It's still the lust of my heart that corrupted what I did. God is so gracious to forgive me for my sins, and I appreciate Aria so much for forgiving me for what I've done.
So the next question is, what helps each of you feel connected, safe, and loved by the other? So for me, and I think really for both of us, it helps when we have long conversations, normally past 10 p.m. It's the optimal time to have those conversations. And it doesn't start out this way, but if we've just been talking for a while and then we eventually get into deeper topics and we really just start to share a lot that is closer to us, that I think helps us really feel connected. But also intently listening to the other and asking clarifying questions and focusing on what they're saying instead of what I want to interject. I think is true for both of us. To feel really connected and loved and safe. And I think in the fact that we know that when we share parts of ourselves with the other person, that we're not going to share this with anyone else. Like, sacred information is sacred. We're not going to share that with anyone else. And
one of the big things I think of is that our actions speak a lot louder than our words. The setup to get to those conversations of if a conversation needs to happen, I want to actually intentionally communicate that I'd like to talk to you about something and work to set up a time where I'm demonstrating my love to you by patiently, consistently using those actions as I bring up whatever the conversation is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of the things. And so like the actions of listening, the actions of understanding, asking clarifying questions, giving people the benefit of the doubt, those actions mean so much for feeling intimacy. And then the biggest one that I think is, as you were saying, like the idea of like information being sacred, of like if you think that information should be shared to someone else, ask first.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very easy to break trust with somebody by sharing information that they thought should not be shared, or they wanted to be asked first, and that will ruin any level of trust that you can have with the other person.
The next question is, what is something you wish you had known about couple communication? I think for me, because communication was kind of an issue in the first few months, and I think for me, it was mostly because I was still scared to bring up subjects that I was nervous about. And because I didn't know how the conversations were going to go down, and I didn't know how he would take it, which is so silly because literally every single conversation that we've ever had, every time that I've ever brought up something that I've been nervous to share or talk about, like, you've always responded in the best way possible. But I guess in my head, I just wasn't sure. Like, I wasn't scared that he was going to be mad at me, but I was just like, I'm a very private person, and I've always been a very private person, so I think in the first few months of marriage, that was something I was like, I don't know if I really want to talk about this. And that did hinder some connectedness that I think we could have had, and just, some issues that maybe could have not been as long as they were if we had talked more. And the thing that I have kind of found from that I try to tell other people is, if you're scared to talk about it, bring it up anyway, and sooner than later. I think that it's important to talk about the things that you're scared about, and when you are talking about them and you're both working on listening to each other, and you're both, neither of you is going to share this information, then I think once you get into that conversation, you will feel so much closer to the other person at the end of it, and you will have worked through issues. That's kind of what I didn't put into practice. I might have known beforehand, but I didn't put it into practice, that even if you're scared to talk about this, you still need to. And I think that, like, both of us sometimes can have things that have come up in our minds, whether they're just, like, issues that we've been dealing with from an outside source, not necessarily a marriage issue. Something's heavy on my heart because of a trial that someone else has gone through, or, just a struggle that I'm having internally, and I don't really feel like bringing it up. But there's going to be a barrier between us because I'm intentionally withholding something from him. Am I sinning in withholding something from him? Not necessarily.
Not everything needs to be shared.
Not everything needs to be shared, but I think there's quite a few things that you just feel so much more close, and that barrier just falls when you do share those things. And of course, like, if it's the confidence of someone else, like if my friend comes to me and she says, hey, like, I'm going through this struggle, and, like, I'm going to share it with you, but I really don't want you to share it with anyone else. I'm not going to share it with my husband. If I feel like I should share it with my husband to be able to give her good advice, I will ask her first. Are you okay if I share this? And if she's still not okay with it, I'm still not going to share it. Other than that, I think if something is causing a barrier between you and your husband because you've not been communicating about it, you need to talk about it.
Yeah, and I think I just can't emphasize enough the idea of tenderness, intentionality, and persistence.
Yeah.
About the fact that there's a lot of these things. There have been times when I knew that you were dealing with something. It was sort of coming between us, and I would try to treat you in a way that was as loving as I could find, hold you in my arms, like treat you as tenderly and kindly as I could. And I say, I know you're not ready to talk about it right now. Let me know when you're ready to talk about it. And to be there consistently, not holding it over your head, but just like, no, this is something that we need to deal with, and I'm trying to make it as easy, try to make it as easy for you as I can, because consistency is very, very meaningful when it's done in love. Oh, and this sort of advice is because we have a good relationship, and we're giving advice for people in good relationships. If you're in a relationship where you suspect that they're abusing you, they're narcissistic, we don't deal with that, so therefore we're not giving advice on that. So, just please understand that, And
if you think you are being abused, or you think your husband or wife is a narcissist, then I really think that the first thing you should do is you should go to your pastor, or you should go to an elder or an older person that you would trust and bring them that issue, because it's not good to stay in a situation like that.
It's just not the situation we're dealing with, so therefore our advice is, to make good marriages great.
Okay, last question, which we've both been asked this before, and it's very fun. What is your favorite thing about each other?
I think my favorite thing about you, I don't know if I can pick just one. There's lots of them. But something I really like about you is the fact that you're really all in, and you don't really hide anything from me. You're just very...
I do not hide things well.
You're very open with me, and it's like, if we're dealing with a problem, the problem's on the table, let's work through it.
Yeah.
It's not... But it's like you have such high aspirations, and you have such lofty goals, and you're gonna go get them.
Yeah.
And I really like being there to help you go get them in a way that's profitable to our marriage.
Yeah. And also something that's just me and my personality is that if I have an issue with you, I'm going to bring it up to you. I'm not going to try to emotionally manipulate you into doing something differently. I'm just gonna come straight forward and tell you, hey, you've been doing this and I do not appreciate it, and how can we work this out? Yeah. And I think that's my favorite thing about me. I think my favorite thing about you, and I hate this question too, because it's how do you pick? So I generally end up listing several things, but you are so understanding of me. And being, having an age gap relationship where I was 18 and you were 24 and you had so much more life experience than I did. And you were obviously 6 years more mature than I was, or maybe even more than that, just because of different experiences that had, matured you in the process. To go into a marriage where, I was just young and unexperienced, the fact that you were so patient and kind and gracious to me in, my lack of maturity and just me trying to figure things out, on my own. I'd never lived by myself before, so I didn't know really how to run a house, and you just had so much patience for me, and that's something that I've really appreciated. And also just especially having so many health issues and just having so many bad days where I can just barely get dinner ready because I'm so exhausted, and having to spend so much money and time and travel and to go to doctors and figure out treatments and all of that stuff. It's just been so wonderful to have you just faithfully supporting me, and faithfully encouraging me, faithfully being patient and kind, and not expecting me to be a perfect person. That's just been really great, because I feel like you could have come at things I'm expecting a perfect person because I'm this perfect person, but we both know neither of us are perfect. So yeah, that's something that I've really appreciated about you. So I think that wraps it up. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this will not be an hour long. I think I have an hour of raw footage, so I'm gonna try to cut it down. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. I hope you have subscribed, because if you want to see more of this content, you should subscribe, and you should hit the notification bell to get your alarms. No, don't be alarmed. But you should be alarmed that there is a new video. And if you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. That helps us to grow, and we just really appreciate you being here along for the journey. We plan to hopefully have a couple more videos. We have many more questions to answer, so we will do that at some point in the near future, hopefully with more brevity than this one. We're looking forward to being back. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you guys next time.